Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. I am a former journalist who wants to help tell amazing stories by asking questions. Everyone has a story to tell, and listening to someone speak their truth and their experience is one of the most human things that we can do. And now more than ever, there is a general lack of willingness to go deep to understand why people think, act, and believe like they do, especially when there are differences of opinions. No time in our history is that more evident than right now. My goal is to counter that by exposing the stories that deserve to be told so that we might all better empathize with the people, the human beings around us. My hope is that along the way, this show provides you an example of what it means to listen more than you speak so that you can become a more thoughtful and informed person. And whether you're a journalist, a podcaster yourself, a blogger, someone who wants to learn how to be quick to listen and slow to speak, or someone who just likes to hear great stories, this is the show for you. And today on the show, I welcome Wendy Behary. Now, Wendy is the author of the book, Disarming the Narcissist, Surviving and Thriving with the Self-Absorbed. Wendy is the founder and clinical director of the Cognitive Therapy Center of New Jersey and the Schema Therapy Institute of New Jersey. We actually discuss what schema therapy is in this interview. She's also a distinguished founding fellow of the Academy of Cognitive Therapy, and she maintains a private practice specializing in narcissism and high-conflict couples therapy. You know, before my wife left her career to stay home with our two children, she worked as a victim advocate for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And dealing with and understanding narcissists was a huge part of her job. So I have a little bit of a relation to this field of study just simply by association with the work that my wife did. But just fascinating conversation with Wendy today, where we talk about where narcissists breed, like where it comes from, what breeds narcissism in someone. We talk about understanding empathy and why that is so important when it comes to understanding how a narcissist views the world, how they see the world, how they operate in the world. We talk about how to distinguish between ego and confidence and narcissism. So many different topics that we cover here, and this was truly a fascinating conversation with Wendy. Real quick, she is actually getting ready to release her third edition, probably not till next year, but the third edition of her book, Disarming the Narcissist. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to the current one, but if you want to stick around for a little while longer and wait on that third edition, we do talk about what's coming in the third edition as well in this episode or in this interview. So enjoy my conversation here with Wendy Behary. How often do you get people who read your book and come to you and say, I think I'm a narcissist, and they're really not? Like they're doing some self-judging here. Do you get that type of feedback from your book?
Some, yes. There are some people who read it and, I think I'm a narcissist, or I act this way sometimes. Does that mean I'm narcissistic? And the book does give the reader an opportunity to look at the spectrum of narcissism and to sort of see that, we can all have some of the traits some of the time, but it's really about deeply entrenched patterns that would help us to better understand and define what narcissism really looks like when you get into more moderate to severe types of narcissism. What more often happens, though, is that I have narcissistic people who read the book and say to me, I know somebody like that. And they don't see themselves. They just completely miss it. That this is about you. This is really about you.
You kind of detail it, or you do detail it in the book, but why is it so hard for a narcissist to see their own behaviors?
Because they have these very well-constructed ways of coping with the world. Their insecurities run deep. They're not aware of them. If you talk about insecurities, they'll scoff at you like you're crazy because they've spent a good part of their lifetime, usually since they're very young, developing these coping styles that include things like being entitled and self-aggrandizing and approval-seeking and masters of the universe and being self-righteous and arrogant and feeling like it's their way or no way and I don't have to follow the rules because I'm special. And so they have really lived a life performing and doing, in many cases succeeding in their performance. And so they do feel entitled, and they don't see that the degree of self-absorption that's being taken up in their body and their energy and that they're really expressing to the world, they don't see that it's even present. They can't fully appreciate the impact of their behaviors on others because they're so busy hiding, and they don't know they're hiding.
Why is it perhaps so easy then for a narcissist to succeed and to get ahead and to hold power or control? What about it makes it so easy for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a lot of it lies in early life experience where a lot of emphasis placed on performance and very little placed on connection, little to none. And it's not surprising that there is a child in the family. Sometimes it's the only child, sometimes it's one of several children, but it's the child who is chosen, who happens to be bright and capable, shows some athletic prowess, is intelligent enough, has that capacity to be a top performer. So that might be motivated by parents who kind of need that for vicariously living through their child for their own sense of wellness and goodness. It's monkey see, monkey do in some cases. And in other cases, it's really a response on the part of this child who happens to be bright and capable of how to get some level of connection and attention in the world because they're not getting it through the other channels like unconditional love that children need. So they focus on being extremely autonomous. And in order to do that, you have to be successful. And if you happen to be bright, your path is a little easier. And they're not going to need anybody. They're going to be in charge. They're going to rise to the top. They're going to be the ones throwing the orders. And that's their way of minimizing their contact with their own vulnerability, their own humanness in many ways.
Yeah, is all narcissism then born out of our childhood experiences?
Yes. I think all of our personalities are born out of a combination of the way we come into the world. So our temperament, our nature, and there's a variety of different temperaments one can come to the world with. Then there's just kind of the natural ways that little ones are as they come to the world that are universally real for all of us. And then there's the environment that you meet. So there's your nurture side, right? So there's nature, natural part of our nature, the unique temperaments that certain children have. And then there's an environment. I often say narcissists, I think, probably come to the world with higher degrees of sensitivity and higher degrees of impulsivity. And then they meet an environment that can't quite meet the emotional needs for teaching them the discipline, the limits when it comes to that impulsivity and helping them to get those unconditional love needs met when it comes to their sensitivity. In fact, they often have these great demands placed upon them that are unrealistic. And I think when you're really sensitive to that, you're going to outperform just so that you don't have to feel the devastating, consequences of this very strong inner critic. And the only way that they can bypass that is to perform as well as they can, do the best that they can, and really supersede anyone who might be seen as a rival or a contestant.
The impulsivity kind of nature that you talked about there, what should a parent look for in a child like that? And what actions, I'm a parent, I've got two little ones. What things should I be looking for? What things can we look for? And how can we course correct there? Yeah,
good question too. All children come into the world with tendencies to be impulsive, right?
Right.
They're touching, they're reaching, they're looking, they're running, they're jumping, they're heading for the street. They want to touch the stove. They want to see
I want that thing and I want it now.
Yeah. Right. So it's sort of what we think of as normal part of development. There are some children who their neurological wiring might be such that they are a bit more impulsive. They have a harder time sitting still, staying still. They may be more hyperactive in their wiring. They may be just a little more hyper curious about the universe and need a loving set of parents or parent who can, guide them, keep them safe without assassinating their character. So the idea is, how do you continue to set the limits, teach them to live with their discomfort, teach them to tolerate frustration, because it's all about frustration tolerance. At the end of the day, we all have to be able to tolerate frustration in order to be prepared to live in the world.
Yeah.
But there's ways and there are ways that parents can help their children. You can scream at a child and threaten them or ignore them and cold shoulder them, and they might do what they're supposed to do, but they're doing it out of fear and shame versus learning it because, you're modeling it or you're applying consequences that are really relevant to the action so that they can see that they actually have the chance to be empowered if they use their ability to keep themselves in check, right? So it really boils down to the wisdom of healthy parenting and the struggle, because it's hard. It's hard to be a really good parent when especially if you have a child who's a little more impulsive or hyperactive or more sensitive, because it requires just even more effort. I mean, parenting's hard enough, but it requires an even greater effort.
Is it then, I don't want to say predetermined, but would a child of narcissistic parents or even one narcissistic parents, do they have a greater chance of being a narcissist themselves?
Not necessarily, although I can see why you might think that could be the case, because certainly there are plenty of people who come from narcissistic parents or parent. And again, it's mimicry. They've learned it, they've seen it, they do it, they sort of act out that same scenario. It's just generational. It's like a legacy of narcissism when you look through the family tree of generations. I've certainly seen that because I work with a lot of narcissistic men, and I'll see sort of the lineup going back to great grandpa. But not necessarily. You can also have narcissistic parents and go the other direction of being just incredibly self-sacrificing and subjugated. You've learned how to live in a world where other people's needs and wants and expectations are first and foremost, and yours don't count. So you become that very self-sacrificing individual who has forfeited your own identity and your own preferences, because that's what you learned growing up with a narcissistic parent, is that you become erased.
What are the challenges then that a child in that situation would deal with later on as an adult, a child of narcissistic parents?
Yeah. Well, in the latter example I was sharing, which is what we commonly see, it's partner selection. So a lot of it boils down to the types of partners, and we are creatures of habit, and we do tend to gravitate towards familiarity, even when we're not aware that we're doing that. So it's not so surprising that someone who had a narcissistic parent may gravitate towards someone who is more, either they're going to gravitate towards the partner who's also narcissistic and very self-absorbed, or has abusive tendencies or controlling tendencies, demanding expectations, lack of reciprocity in the relationship. Or they go the other way and they choose the partner who is so inhibited and detached and shut down just because it's peace, peace at any price. But the price becomes high over time because you're living with someone who you can't really connect with emotionally, right? Like, it makes sense why I might have chosen this partner, because I didn't want that sort of loud, self-righteous, arrogant father that maybe the person grew up with. But now I'm with someone who's very calm and peaceful, but kind of not there. There's no emotional attunement. So you see a lot of this evidenced in partner selection.
Interesting. Is there a case, or are there circumstances where narcissism is developed in adulthood, or are narcissists just playing on those learned childhood emotions and tendencies? Does that question make sense?
It does. And a lot of people are asking that, especially in an era of, Facebook and selfies.
I was going to go there. You read my mind.
Can narcissism suddenly emerge out of, an era of selfies and Facebook? And, listen, I think we can develop these tendencies right through our adolescence. So, in the model that I practice, which is schema therapy, which is a developmental approach and an emotion-focused approach to treatment, we're curious, we're looking at what happened not only as a little child, but what happened in adolescence too, because adolescence is a powerful period of time for emotional development and personality formation. And it's in adolescence where you see a lot of this, competition and now with selfies and online media platforms, which have their benefit for sure. It's not all bad. It's good stuff, but it can take it a little bit too far, for young people who suddenly now your value and your worth is all measured by how perfect you look or how wonderfully you're achieving and how fast you can get it out there to the world for everyone to see and how many likes you're going to get once you put that out there on your social media.
From your perspective, does the good of social media outweigh the negative or the risk factors that you just described?
I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
There are certainly people who enjoy it for being able to promote their businesses. I'd use it for that. You promote your work, you're sharing resources. I think it's fun too, sometimes just for connecting with old friends that maybe you couldn't find otherwise, or sharing a fun story, even showing off a little bit. There's nothing wrong with a little showing off. It's okay. It's part of our nature. We do it. We enjoy the fun and the praise. Who doesn't like to be liked, right? That's not necessarily pathologic and narcissistic. It's the degrees to which it becomes so profoundly important as a measurement of my worth. That this is where I get my value and my worth. This is the only place where I can connect to anyone. And let's face it, that's not incredibly intimate. It's not incredibly emotionally driven, nor is it necessarily reciprocal.
What are the characteristics that go from showing off or maybe a little bit of healthy ego, if that is such a thing, or a phrase that we use, to narcissism? Where is I'm guessing there's not a dividing line, but how do we go from those things being okay in bits and pieces to narcissism and what you just described?
Yeah, there is. I think you're right, Michael. There is a bit of you can sort of see it on the spectrum that there's a population of people who will be annoying because, they're just big show-offs. They're very charming. It's all about winning your approval. You can sort of see right through it pretty quickly, but they're not controlling. They're not terribly entitled. They're not crossing boundaries. They're not violating your rights. They may even have the capacity to show some interest in you too, not only for self-serving purposes, but just because they're curious. So we put them at the more benign end of the spectrum. They're a bit annoying, but they're not necessarily in that category as you go up the spectrum towards the severe end, where you have things like there's no remorse, there's little to no empathy for your feelings, for knowing who you are. It's all about their way or no way, dominance, control, righteousness, entitlement, this sense of grandiosity and this just need for approval, which is like their life breath. And anyone who dares not give them that kind of adulation and applause that they're looking for, runs the risk of being demeaned and demoralized because they can be horribly critical and the severe end of the spectrum. In addition to being charming too, so they can switch, they can go into this sort of charming heroic mode, which can look like it's very generous and caretaking until you cross them or until they actually are being accused of being the perpetrator of your pain. So they'll rush to your rescue if it's a stranger, but if they are the ones who are perpetrating the pain and you try to point that out to them, then watch out, right? They'll shift into sort of this bullying, defensive, defiant mode. And it's just really strenuous and really tedious, dealing with them, as so many will tell you.
Yeah. You mentioned you treat through a method called Schema therapy. Did I get that correct? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you talk a lot about it in the book. Can you just describe what Schema therapy is and how you go about getting a narcissist to get out of that bullying, confrontational mentality when they are met with the wake of their destruction, so to speak.
These are two questions in one that you're asking that are both very important. I mean, schema therapy is a evidence-based. It's a model with science behind it. So we've had a lot of studies conducted to look at the efficacy of this approach in treatment. And it is an integrative model, but it looks at schemas, which means we're looking specifically at early maladaptive schemas, meaning what are these particular life traits, emotional beliefs that we carry around with us based from our childhood experiences and our temperaments, and how do they interfere based on the ways we've learned to cope with them with our functioning in our everyday adult life. Under what conditions do they get activated? So a narcissist, for example, who's usually walking around with a good 8 to 10 early maladaptive schemas, meaning there's these scripts that really hold forth this idea that they're not really good enough, that they actually are defective, and that's the insecurity part, that people aren't going to care about your needs and people are only going to use you. They're very suspicious. They're only going to use you. So they have this mistrust, they have this deprivation, they have this sense of defectiveness, as we call it. They have this great sense of entitlement, and that if you can get the important people to pay attention to you and win their approval, that's the approval seeking side, then you're good, you're gold. And they have these high standards and this strong internalized demanding part of themselves that's always pushing them to do more, to try harder, to be the best. Now, there are versions of this, so it's not a one size fits all, but it's a typical profile. In schema therapy, what we're trying to do is unlearn these coping styles that have been attached to these core beliefs so that they can, the more they can, I'll whittle it down to something very simple. What I would typically say to a narcissistic client is, once you really know you're fine, that you're really fine as you are without having to prove anything, you won't need all of this bluster. You won't need to do this. You won't need to go into your little self-stimulating mode where you get yourself in trouble with alcohol or sex addiction. You won't need to constantly grab the microphone and hold the spotlight in order to prove to everybody that you're smart. You won't need to do those things once you know in here that you're actually really fine and you always were. You just didn't get that message. And so it's a lot of work with the imagination and rescripting and unlearning that takes place to meet those core needs.
But go ahead.
The second part of your question was really important, which is, do they come to treatment? And the answer is usually because they have to, not because they want to, but because somebody's threatened them. So there's usually leverage, some consequence, something that, where the stakes are high enough where they're saying, I don't want to lose my partner. I don't want to lose my kids. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose my driver's license. So I'm coming to therapy. So they're walking in begrudgingly. And so it really takes a good, solid, experienced therapist who understands them, who has a good treatment approach that actually works with them before anything is going to happen that's meaningful.
What are the things that you begin to notice as somebody who is a narcissist begins to go through therapy and is attending? What are the things that you begin to notice that begin to change about them and the way they carry themselves as those methods begin to take hold? How do they change?
That's a great question. I love questions that people haven't asked me before.
I'm so glad.
That's a really great question because no one has actually asked that question before. But what you start to notice when the therapy takes hold and the connection, you've got to build that connection. So it's incredibly important for the therapist to be comfortable and to be real and to be able to use our own, it's easy to be intimidated, which is why most people don't choose to work with narcissists and they think I'm a masochist. But, it's incredibly rewarding when you can posture yourself in a way where you're literally a caretaker for the vulnerable part of them underneath. And when they feel safe enough because you are real enough and not talking in jargon to them, but really trying to understand their makeup, really curious about the ordinary part of them underneath, not all their extraordinary achievements and trophies and expensive suits and cars, but just their ordinary emotions. as you start to see that begin to matter to them, and they're coming to therapy a little more voluntarily, and they're opening up a little bit more emotionally with you, what you'll notice is less of the approval seeking. So there's less time spent in, and then I did this, and then I did that, and here's who I know, and the name dropping. You'll notice that they're less detached and dismissive and critical because they're starting to feel more comfortable in their own skin. They're able to express things like, instead of saying, you're pathetic and, you don't appreciate anything to their partners, they'll say, that hurt my feelings. So these are the shifts. And to listeners who are with narcissists going, oh, that would never happen with my narcissistic partner, I say, maybe not, because it's really hard to get change when you're working with narcissism, but it's not impossible. I worked with them for 30 years. I see it. I still see it. And it's really wonderful to see it when it happens, but it's hard.
How does somebody who's gone through therapy and begun to be okay with themselves and trust that who they are is good, how do they then approach wanting to achieve success after the fact, where so much of their identity was wrapped up in it, and now they have a job to do, or they have career goals, or they have aspirations that they want to achieve? Do they struggle with that at all?
Another very good question that doesn't get asked very much, if at all, is there is this fear in therapy for the narcissist that if I get soft, if I go to that emotional place, if I drop my guard, I'm going to lose my edge. And it's my edge, my razor sharp edge, that makes me the success that I am, the great surgeon that I am, the great financial wizard that I am, the great accountant or banker that I am, whatever, the great plumber that I am. Doesn't have to all be in the big white collar profession, right? It's a fear, because they have this idea that their success and their ambition and their drive and their energy and their outcome is all related to this sort of super sharp, no emotions are welcome, no intimacy, no personal, all that stuff is weak and wasteful. This is how they have it correlated. So it's sort of inch by inch, they get to see that as they drop their guard, they're not any less successful. They're not any less talented. That kind of lives in a different hemisphere. That's something that they're either just innately good at, or they've had enough experience. They know what they're doing. In fact, what it does is sometimes increases their success because their interpersonal connections become stronger. So the people they're working with are actually enjoying being in their company, not just putting up with them.
Yeah. You mentioned in the book, and I want to get this right, so I'm going to read this. You mentioned that understanding empathy, it's misused and often misunderstood in dealing with narcissism. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked me that, because this is one of the criticisms of my book, or of me, is when people read it, because I'm not the author who writes narcissists are demons, devils, Satan, run for your life, they should perish in the fires of hell. I don't write that. I don't believe that. I do believe they can do harm. I do believe they can do terrible harm at times to their families and their loved ones. I don't believe they do it with intention to harm. That's a sociopath. That's a different personality disorder.
Right.
I believe they do it as a way of protecting their ego. That's not an excuse. It's just an explanation. But when I use the word empathy, it often gets misunderstood as sympathy or compassion, and they are all different. Empathy is not sympathy. It's not feeling sorry for the narcissist. It's not making excuses for them. It's not coddling them. It's not, oh, poor you had a tough childhood. It's not that. It's a deep, skin-felt, bone-felt understanding of someone's experience. Empathy means I get it, or I'm trying to get it. Not that I agree with it, but I get it. So I can say to my client very honestly, I get that, growing up with your dad who said, be a star and you can have whatever you want. You can curse, you can yell, you can stay out as late as you want when you're a teenager. I don't care. Just be a superstar. That's all that matters to me. So I get that this is what you learned. That's not your fault. So I'm not feeling sorry for him. I'm just making sense of it. I get it, Joe. But in the real world, relationships and give and take, and people have feelings, that doesn't work where you're just pushing people around and ordering them and telling them what to do. I know it's what you were told you could do as long as you do well. And unfortunately, that message was not really very honest or fair to you, but it's what you were told. Or I'll say to them, I don't think that what you're saying to me right now is meant to be hurtful, but I got to tell you, that's hurtful. So it's empathy. Like, I get you. I get that you have a really complex personality and there's a lot of reasons why you do what you do. But so empathy is this beautiful gateway to confrontation. It's a beautiful gateway to accountability. It is a beautiful way for anyone who is suffering with a narcissist in their life to stop personalizing it like it's your fault. Stop doubting yourself. Understand their makeup so you can liberate yourself from self-blame. It's not about being a softie and just feeling sorry for them.
And that's on the part of the victim of narcissism, correct? That they feel like they would be soft on them by being empathetic.
Yeah, because people don't understand what the word empathy really means.
Yeah.
When you hear empathy, most people jump to compassion, which really is more about this feeling compelled to help or to make better, sympathy, to feel sorrow, right? Empathy means understanding, walking in someone's shoes, trying to understand. Now, you might, when you're doing that, shift into compassion because you can feel the suffering, so you start to experience compassion. But it's not about letting them off the hook. It's actually the opposite. The more you understand, the better and easier it becomes to hold them accountable. The more you can get their attention.
Yeah. You mentioned, so many of your narcissistic clients come to you because they've been forced to, either by law perhaps, or by, an ultimatum, like you do this or I'm gone.
Right.
Is it possible, or I guess, is it possible for a narcissist to realize their own ways and change out of their own volition?
Out of their own volition.
Yeah.
I think, I just think anything's possible, but I can be a delusional optimist at times. So, I do think that anything is possible. I think it's rare for a narcissist to change of their own volition. I think because it's a vocabulary, it's like deciding tomorrow I'm going to speak French and I've never spoken a word of French. It's so outside of their lexicon. They haven't learned what it means to really emotionally connect. They're so uncomfortable in the world of intimacy. I mean, they can be charming. They can pull off really good social skills when they're in public. They can be funny. They can be interesting. But it's that deep, ordinary, personal level of intimacy that's hard for them. That's a zone that they're not very comfortable in. And so they'd have to really learn how to do that in order to change in any way that's really meaningful. I mean, they can stop doing certain things. Like, you'll see in some cases that a partner says, that's it, I've had it. You knock it off with your critical ways and your demanding ways, or I'm done. And they go into a honeymoon phase where they can stop for a while. They can challenge themselves, discipline themselves to produce what I call the absence of conflict. So you have the absence of conflict, which can linger for a period of time, not the presence of pleasure, but the absence of conflict. But it's just a matter of time, before they're going to go back to those behaviors and patterns that are so familiar. I have narcissists come into my treatment room and say, tell me what to say. Tell me what to do. I'll do it. Just tell me what to say. Give me the script. I'm really good at memorizing things. And if it gets her off my back, I will go home and just say everything you tell me to say. And I say, I could teach you. I could coach you. We could write a script. And I believe you. You could go home and repeat it. And your partner will probably hit the floor because they won't believe that this is anything but a script. But nonetheless, even if you could pull it off for weeks, there's going to come a time when emotionally you're going to get charged again. You'll be activated. We call that a trigger. And when that happens, doesn't matter what kind of script you've got here, because what rules is happening in here and in here in the middle part of your brain. It's your emotional world. Mm. And that is going to put you right back into that same old pattern.
In the book, and even now just in our conversation, you've made mention of a lot of men being the primary narcissists, mm-hmm. and not that women can't be. But what is it about men and our upbringing and our tendencies that give way to narcissism more than it does with women?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of women, as you mentioned just now, mm-hmm. Michael, that could give the narcissistic male a run for his money. I mean, there are certainly plenty of female counterparts. There are those divas, for sure. There are differences sometimes in the way females will show up in their narcissistic wardrobe, if you will, a little bit different than men. But I do think that we tend to see a majority of the population with males because of socialization, even in 2020, that there's still this, I mean, there's testosterone, for example, so maybe more tendencies towards aggression anyway, but there's also, a lot more emphasis on competition and still a lot of emphasis on, brawn and strength and control and being in charge of your feelings and stoicism in many cases. I mean, not everyone. I mean, we have moved in some good directions, I think, but socialization is what it is. And I think constitutional makeup plays a role as well, which is why you're going to see it very often in men or men who have narcissistic fathers where this is your gender role model. So going back to that question about imitation, you'll get that legacy of narcissism that proceeds.
Why is it with women, as you point out in the book, that they tend to take on a more woe is me disposition with it, if that's the right word? Why there's such a stark contrast, it seems like, as you detail in the book. The men tend to be the more power-hungry, power-seeking, controlling, and the women kind of, I don't know, you tell me, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Why does that seem to rear its head more in women?
Women are given permission to be victims. We get that permission from a very early stage. We have permission to be vulnerable more than little girls get more of that permission than little boys in most cases. So anybody who's thinking, well, I didn't have that, there are exceptions to everything. But the general pattern is that women have that permission. When you add elements of narcissism to the mix, you just get a very virtuous victim. So women can be woeful and martyrs. And the difference is you'll see a lot of emphasis on the idea of suffering. But it's not just, I had a bad day and, oh, you're not going to believe the day I have. It's, my day is worse than anybody's day could ever be. My life, my work is harder than anyone's work could ever be. So they are still seeking the power and that sense of extraordinariness like the male counterpart, but it's through the suffering. It's through the martyrdom or this kind of virtuous victim, this kind of sanctimonious way of living in the world, and morally self-righteous, rules according to me, but it still rules according to me. And it's still very attention-seeking. It's still looking for someone who will approve and kind of place you, I don't know how you do it, putting you up on that pedestal. And so that's how it shows up. But I think a lot of it, again, has to do with early socialization and the messages we get.
I want to jump back to something you also said a little bit earlier and kind of said it in passing, but it doesn't have to be the doctors and the lawyers and the surgeons. Right. Why is it important to understand that this can happen in any profession, any personality type? I mean, why is that very, very important for us to understand?
Because you don't want to miss it. You don't want to shortchange yourself. If you're living with a narcissist who is unemployed, who is a blue-collar professional or blue-collar worker or whatever the correct lingo is, they're not the surgeon or the Wall Street mogul or the big shot banker or accountant or whatever. Narcissists come in all shapes and sizes when it comes to socioeconomic status, and they're just usually the top in their rank wherever it is. So they could be unemployed, they could be doing a blue collar position, but they're still going to have this sense of, I'm right, you're wrong, my way or no way, I'm entitled to because, and they've got a list of reasons why they're entitled and why they have to be right. So you're still going to see that same way of presenting oneself with the same sense of privilege that they feel that is owed to them, or attention that is owed to them, even when they're not in the upper strata. You're more likely to see them in that upper stratosphere of professional life simply because of the origins of narcissism. So they're shooting for the moon because they desperately don't want to have to count on anyone ever. They want to be in charge. And so, being at the top of your class or being in a profession where you have plenty of resources at your disposal means you never have to be dependent, or so it seems. You don't have to be dependent. But then when they get sick or something happens or their job is threatened, it's a real catastrophe for a narcissist. Their whole world is shaken beyond what would be the reasonable reaction to a world that's being altered by illness or by the threat of losing a job, because it's their identity that is so caught up in this experience.
This completely randomly popped into my head as you were just describing those jobs and those striving for that. What happens when two narcissists like worlds collide? What happens when you've got two narcissists that have to work together or work very closely in the same quarters? What's that situation like?
It's ugly. It's like politics, right? It's like Hollywood.
Okay.
I sometimes call that Hollywood. It's like who can grab the spotlight, and it's like you picture two people just like, put it on me. No, put it on me. I'm right. No, I'm right. I mean, it's not pretty. It's everything that you just pictured in your head. It's the word you used. In fact, it's a clash.
Yeah.
There's a lot of clashing for power, for prominence, they can be very noble at times by deferring to each other because they want each other's approval, especially if they're both in pretty powerful positions and they have impressive titles and reputation. And this one has the goodies over here with certain folks, and this one has goodies over here with certain folks. So they may use each other for being able to benefit from all the goodies that are out there. But decision-making, problem-solving can be very difficult. And so you get a lot of clashing.
You're working on the 3rd edition of your book. Is that correct? Or is it's just completed, or where are we at with that?
I just finished writing all the new material for the 3rd edition. So going to go into copy editing soon and then done.
I obviously don't want you to give away too much of the new stuff, but what can we expect with the 3rd edition? What new things, what new research is out there that you explore in this 3rd edition?
Yeah, I'm happy to share it. It's a lot of what I've done in the 2nd edition, now in the 3rd edition, is I pay attention to the readers. I look at what they're looking for, what they're liking and not liking, and what they want more of, what they want to understand better. So I've taken the entire book and rewritten it. I haven't really removed any content, but I've reworked the content so that I'm elaborating on things that maybe weren't so clear. I've tweaked some of the language. I've added some new examples, but I've also added a lot of new content. And I'm talking about hypersexuality and narcissism and the whole impact of one who's been betrayed and the trauma that comes with betrayal. I've added a whole chapter on co-parenting with a narcissist. It's a very tricky issue. I co-host a monthly support seminar with Susan Stiffelman, who's a parenting expert, and it's her community and I'm her co-host. And we talk to people all over the world who are dealing with the struggles of co-parenting when you have a narcissistic partner in the house and outside of the house. So I've written a whole chapter on that. And I've also written some new material on divorcing a narcissist and the challenges of finding a lawyer who's narcissist savvy and dealing with the legal system, and that it's really a totally different ballgame when you're divorcing a narcissist in terms of approach and language. in order to get a fair outcome, which is so hard, under just ordinary circumstances.
Right.
So I'm excited about this, and mostly in response to reader requests.
You mentioned betrayal. Betrayal of what type? What does that look like?
Betrayal trauma is not unlike other traumas in that you can suffer post-traumatic reactions, meaning you can suffer flashbacks and fears and anxiety and anger and confusion and I said flashbacks, but just even anticipatory anxiety, more so than you might with post-traumatic, ordinary or stranger trauma, as we call it, in that you're living with the perpetrator of the crime in many cases. So, or the trauma, I should say, not necessarily a crime. But when narcissists betray through sex addiction, so it might be paid sex workers, pornography, affairs, cyber sex in chat rooms, things of that sort, and they become discovered. First of all, they're highly defiant and defensive and in denial about it until the evidence becomes undeniable. And then it's your fault. So they're blaming and demeaning and accusatory about their partners not being something enough for them. So, what did you expect? So they're making excuses for the behavior and really pretty unremorseful about what they've done because they can't get, it's too unbearable to get just how unacceptable and shameful this behavior is. For the partner who has been offended by this, it's a sense of betrayal that's really different than when you've been traumatized by an attack from a stranger. Because when you're attacked by a stranger, you have a partner you can go home to who becomes your refuge and your secure comfort, your base. But when your perpetrator is your partner, then there's nowhere to go. In fact, you keep worrying it's going to happen again. You're desperately seeking that deep empathy, somebody to walk in your shoes and know what it feels like to be you, which the narcissist can't do because they feel like the bad guy. So they can't go there. So betrayal is very powerful, very painful. And I talk a lot about what we can do about that and how to identify it and how to be an advocate for yourself under these conditions.
I want to set up my next question by giving you a little bit of background here. My wife, before we had our second child and she left her career to stay home with our two children at the time, or now, she was an advocate for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Yeah.
Is that a betrayal of what you were just talking about? You were talking about pornography or buying sex or the other things you mentioned. Does it also extend into physical betrayal?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding that. What you're likely to see with narcissists is often more of this sexual betrayal, but certainly betrayal trauma would include those who have been betrayed by a loved one, a safe other, a seemingly or supposed to be safe other who has become violent, who has sexually assaulted this individual as a child, as an adolescent, even as an adult. That's a betrayal, and we call it betrayal because it's a known other who would otherwise be considered someone who I should be able to trust and count on, who would be a protector of sorts, an ally in my world, who has now crossed that border.
For someone who is involved in a relationship of some sort, whether it's a coworker or, in a professional relationship or an actual intimate relationship with a narcissist, and they just are at their wit's end, where do they start? Where do they even begin to try and make a change happen?
You can listen, there's always room for what I call, many of my clients have heard me use this phrase, dropping seeds in the soil and watching to see what might harvest. So it's always worthwhile to think about what you would like to do. If you want the relationship to work, you want to see if it can work, you want to see if you can have some impact on change. It's always worthwhile to use strategies. I have a lot of strategies in my book for this. There's a lot of support out there. There's also a lot of not so supportive a lot of claims on support that are really, again, about the demonizing of the narcissist. And I'll tell you, it can feel good to just go into anger and be furious, right?
Yeah.
Just be angry, furious. They're no good. They're evil. They can't change. Run for your life. That can feel good. And in some cases, it just might be true that you need an exit strategy because it's so volatile and so unsafe. And the narcissist is never going to engage in professional help, which they need if they're that severe. That you really do need to start thinking about how to protect yourself and how to exit. I'd say learn as much as you can about narcissism, because this will immediately begin to create sensibility about what you're dealing with. And again, it will release you from the burden of self-blame or self-doubt if you've been carrying that. A lot of people say, I don't blame myself. But there is a lingering, ouchy feeling in there of self-blame. So learn everything that you can, really the important stuff, not just they're born terrible, bad seeds. Learn about their makeup from trained professionals. Learn about yourself. Learn about you. What is it that you've learned and kind of carried with you, adaptations from your own life that are making it so difficult for you to assert yourself, that are making it so difficult for you to continue to believe in yourself, believe in your own rights? What about this is like a little scarily familiar when you're triggered and upset? Beyond the fact that this is a narcissist, which, we can all say is uncomfortable. But when it seems to silence us, we want to be curious about, why am I silent? Am I keeping the peace for the sake of my kids? Maybe. Am I scared because it's just too dangerous? Maybe. But if it's neither of those things, which it isn't for all people, then why am I silent? What have I learned about me? Look for someone who understands narcissism. There's not a lot of therapists out there, but there's a good number that do. And I certainly can help recommend people in different places around the world. So, get some help, even if it's just a little short-term help to help you to educate yourself and learn some strategies that might be useful. Experiment. Give yourself a timeline. You can always renegotiate that. That's what I tell. Find ways to care for yourself and nurture yourself. You've got to have a strong spine. You have to be operating from your healthy adult self when you're dealing with someone of this magnitude. You've got to find a way to secure your own vulnerability, even if it's just imagining, putting yourself in a safe place so that you can be present as an adult. You never want to confront the narcissist in your life from a vulnerable position, right? So there's ways and strategies for doing that effectively.
I love asking my guests this question because I don't think it's asked enough of people. And that is, especially, when you do the type of work that you do, what is a question or what's a question that you wish you were asked more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does get asked, but maybe could be asked a little bit more. Like, what is the value of, learning about narcissism when you're the one suffering with it, and the attention should really be on. I mean, this question gets asked a lot by my clients. Why do I have to spend so much time, learning about narcissism when I'm the one who's really struggling here and I need to, take care of me? And the answer is they're not mutually exclusive. Yes, you do need to take care of you. You do need to be a focal point. But interestingly, learning more about narcissism is the number one step to taking care of you, right? To create that real deep, sensible understanding of what you're dealing with, right? It's like sort of, you're not going to venture out there without your map or your GPS. If you've never been to this location, you could try to use your sense of direction, but it may be a bit tedious and you might get lost and snagged. So this is sort of setting your GPS. Yeah.
Very good. Well, Wendy, how can people connect with you and follow along with your work? And when does the new edition of the book, when is it set to come out?
Sometime in 2021. I don't know for sure, but it will be out not before that. We're not there quite yet, but sometime in 2021. So you can stay tuned to that information and get lots of resources from my website. I have a monthly online support community for people who are dealing with narcissists. You're welcome to join us at any time and leave us at any time if you had enough. So you can get all the details on my book and podcasts. There's some free podcasts there and reading materials at disarmingthenarcissist.com, or just type my name into your Google browser and you'll find my website that way.
Well, I'll be sure to have it linked up in the show notes so people can have one-click access to it. But thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this. I've been looking forward to this all week. And thank you again. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate it.
Many thanks to Wendy Behary for her time and insight on the show today. I don't know about you, but I found this absolutely fascinating. The book is equally fascinating. Please do me and Wendy a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to today's conversation. Be a little bit tactful in that. I don't want you to say, hey, listen to this podcast on narcissism. I think you need it. Tread lightly, I should say there. Maybe read the book first. Share this episode with your network and help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you have it in your heart, please leave a rating and review of this show wherever you might be listening. And if you know someone who you think would be a great guest on the follow-up question, or have a question you'd like me to address on a future episode, please email me, michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or go to thefollowupquestion.com/contact and submit a guest recommendation. And if you want to improve your own ability to listen and ask questions, hop over to thefollowupquestion.com/newsletter and subscribe. And when you do, I'll send you my free guide, the 10 follow-up questions guaranteed to keep a conversation going. You'll also be the first to know about new content and fresh tips and tricks. And that's all free when you subscribe at thefollowupquestion.com/newsletter. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.